All right, let's go ahead and cover units 6 and 7 in this assignment. So this is your customer accounts and your risks. These are very, very simple. These are cut and dry, black and white material. There is nothing gray about any of this. The statements are the facts. There's no concepts here. So this is very, very easily studied material. Let's start out talking about our non-qualified accounts. You see, there's all different types of customer accounts. There's individual accounts, which we call TODs. These are going to be for the beneficial, have one beneficial owner, and upon their death, it's going to transfer to whoever's name was named as the beneficiary. It will bypass probate. Then we have our joint accounts. There's two types of joint accounts. Joint, of course, is referencing two or more. A JTW ROS is a joint tenant with rights of survivorship. If we have two or more people that would like the money in the event of their death to easily pass to the other person without question or having to go through any type of process, we would open a JTW ROS. This would typically be for like a married couple. If my husband were to die, I'd have full access to 100% of the money in this account. If I were to die, he would have full access to all of the money in the account. Another type of joint account is a TIC. This is a tenant in common. If we have two or more people that would like to open an account, but in the event of one of their deaths, their portion, their proportional ownership of that account would not automatically pass to the others. Then we have our business accounts. A sole proprietorship, this is one person that owns the business that's doing business as whatever that business name is. I always use the example, let's say that I open a flower shop. I'm Emma Lay, DBA, doing business as Freaky Flowers, right? Or whatever I choose to call that. That's a sole proprietorship account. Then we have our partnership accounts. Myself and a business associate opens an account. We're going to be whatever that partnership is referencing, our flower shop or whatever it may be. And then we have our corporations, whether it's a C Corp, an S Corp, or a LLC. In any and all of these cases, we would have to have what we call a corporate account. Now, for the partnership and corporate accounts, these require the corporate resolution, the partnership agreements, things like that. You see, the idea here is we need to know what type of trading is allowed in these types of accounts. Can we margin trade? Can we use those aggressive strategies like uncovered options and, short selling, things like that? Are we allowed to do those in those accounts? And in the case of a corporation, it would name who actually has access to the account as far as withdrawing money, making trading decisions, things like that. Then we have our fiduciaries in the accounts. Let's say that we have a fiduciary account that's called a trust. In this case, a person would have the right to control another person's assets. Much like our power of attorneys, FPOA is a full power of attorney. LPOA is a limited power of attorney. Very simply put, full power of attorney is allowed to make withdrawals and trading decisions, whereas limited power of attorney can only make trading decisions. No withdrawals would be permitted. If a power of attorney, whether it be full or limited, is durable, it means that it would survive the grantor's incapacitation. So if I have granted you power of attorney over my assets, whether it be full or limited, if it is durable, if I were to go into a coma or be diagnosed with Alzheimer's or something along this lines, deemed incompetent for any reason, you would still be able to have that power over my account. However, upon my death, all power of attorneys will cease. Now, what you also might see on your test is what we call a custodial account. And a custodial account will either be an UGMA, a Uniform Gift to Minors Act, or a UTMA, a Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. As you can see, the two of these almost are exactly alike. However, there are two major differences. Here you can see there's one custodian and one minor that's required on each account. Keep in mind that this money is, or these assets are, the minor's assets. So we only require the minor's social security number. You got it? Only the minor's social security number. The custodian, we do not need a social security number for. All gifts that are given to an UGMA or UTMA are irrevocable. We are not allowed to use any aggressive strategies like margining, short sales, or uncovered options. Any amount of money can be placed into the UGMA or the UTMA. However, the gift tax rules do apply. If that gift goes over what the IRS allows as a gift each year, then the child would have to have their taxes done. Now, when we say unlimited contributions for an UGMA, this is referencing cash and securities only. Whereas unlimited contributions for an UGMA could include cash and securities as well as any type of property, interest in things like DPPs. Those are allowed in the UTMA. The donor does not have to be the custodian over the account. I could be the donor and have my son as a custodian for my grandchild. And the donor and the custodian don't have to be related. In an UGMA account, when the child reaches the age of majority in the state that they live in, typically that is 18 years old, they would have full access to any monies that are in the UGMA accounts. When the child reaches 18 in an UTMA, although we could give that to the child at that time, we're not required to like we are with the UGMA, but rather we can keep control over these funds until the child reaches age 25, at which time it would completely pass to the child. Now, nobody has, I shouldn't say it that way. There's no special permission that must be given for an UGMA or an UTMA account. Typically on the test, it'll say something like, John wants to put money away for his nephew. Which of the following is true? Does he have to ask the parents for permission? No. Does he have to get court allowed privileges? No. There is nothing that must be done. You can simply open this type of account for any child. So here we have just an example of what type of account you would open. A married couple that's concerned about ease of service and transfer, JTWROS. A single person who wants to designate a beneficiary, that would be an individual, a TOD account. Wealthy couples who have established a trust, that would be a trust account. A brother and sister putting money aside to buy a house for a parent. If neither would want each other to have access to their money, then a TIC account would be appropriate. An individual owner of a small unincorporated business, this would be a sole proprietorship business account. 4 joint owners in an unincorporated business would be a partnership account. So you see, you just take the details of each one of these different types of accounts, and it'll assist you in knowing which one would be appropriate to open. Then we get into our qualified accounts. We're going to start out talking about our IRAs, our individual retirement accounts, starting with our traditional IRA. A traditional IRA allows contributions up to a maximum. That maximum is whatever's allowed by the IRS or 100% of the income, whichever is less. If I've made, let's say, $100,000 this year, then I can do up to the IRS maximum. If I've only made 200,000, or excuse me, 2,000 this year, then I would only be able to do 2,000. This would fall below the IRS maximum allowable contribution. There is something known as a spousal option. A spousal option is for a non-working spouse. It allows the breadwinner to be able to make contributions to the spouse's IRA on their behalf using their income. Naturally, the breadwinner would have to be able to fund their IRA. There would have to be enough money that's been generated from their earned income. Spousal contributions to an IRA under the spousal option are irrevocable. All contributions to an IRA will grow tax deferred. When we contribute to a traditional IRA, for most investors, we're able to deduct that amount from our yearly taxes. The things that can cause you not to be allowed to deduct from your taxes is if you make too much income and if you're participating in a qualified plan through your employer. If I'm going to make a withdrawal from my IRA prior to age 59 and a half, the IRS will impose a 10% penalty on that withdrawal. There are some exceptions. The highly testable exceptions to the 10% penalty is death, disability, and a first-time home purchase with no more than $10,000 allowed to withdraw as a down payment. Once I'm at retirement age, which according to the IRS is 59 and a half or greater, any income that I withdraw would be treated for tax purposes, just like my ordinary income would be treated. It would be taxed at whatever my tax bracket is, my marginal tax rate. A traditional IRA requires what we call an RMD. This is a required minimum distribution, and the required minimum distribution must begin at age 72. The rule says that the first distribution must begin by April 1st of the year that follows the year that we turn 72 years old. The only exception to this is if you're still employed as a full-time employee. Certain investments that are not permitted to be in an IRA would include those very speculative styles of investing like margin sales, short sales, and uncovered options. It also would never permit life insurance, municipal bonds due to their exemption from taxation at the federal level, and it cannot contain any collectibles. The Roth IRA is a lot like the traditional, but there are some major differences. It has the same contributions rules as far as your earned income up to the maximum, what you've earned, or the maximum allowable contribution, whichever is less. Does have a spousal option, just like the traditional. And just like the traditional, as this money is growing, it will grow tax deferred. However, here we see a big difference. When we're contributing to our Roth IRA, we do not get to deduct it from our income on our annual taxes. There are income limits that apply. And if you make too much income, you would not be permitted to contribute to a Roth IRA. As you can see, it has that same withdrawal penalty, 10% penalty, if we withdraw money from our Roth IRA prior to age 59 and a half, with those same exceptions: death, disability, and a first-time home purchase, no more than $10,000 that we could use for a down payment. Here we see a big difference between the two. When we begin to withdraw at age 59 and a half or greater, we would not pay taxes on any of the withdrawals. And since we're not required to pay any taxes, there would be no required minimum distribution at age 72. We do have the same investment rules: no margin sales, no short sales, no uncovered options. There is no life insurance permitted to be in a Roth IRA. No municipal securities, again, due to the exemption from federal taxation, and no collectibles would be permitted. I always like to take a moment and point out the big difference here between the traditional and the Roth. Let's say that you've contributed to a traditional IRA and I contribute to a Roth. We pick the exact same investment vehicle, and both at age 25, we begin to contribute $6,000 each year to our IRAs. Both of us, by age 30, have managed to contribute $30,000, $6,000 each year for 5 years. At age 30, we both stopped contributing to our IRA. At age 65, we both decide we'd like to begin to withdraw from our IRAs. Let's look at the difference in the impact it would have. Here, the money that was contributed in a traditional IRA was able to be deducted from our income on our taxes. So we paid no taxes on the contribution that we put in. Here in the Roth IRA, I did pay taxes on the money that was put in. At age 65, when we begin to withdraw from the traditional IRA, every deduction from it would be taxed. Here, when we begin to deduct from the IRA, we take our deductions, our withdrawals, excuse me, there would be no taxes on any of this money. So as you can see, those big differences between the traditional and the Roth. Many times people say, well, why would you even bother to open a traditional? Well, maybe your income limits are your income is too high, it reaches the limit, and you can't contribute to a Roth IRA. Or maybe you are requiring a taxable deduction of some type. So there's lots of different reasons why we make the decision, but it's important for you to understand the difference between the traditional and the Roth. Here we can see them side by side. They both have tax-free growth, but only the traditional is taxable at distribution. They both have an early withdrawal penalty. The Roth has a tax-free distribution. The traditional has a deductible contribution, whereas the Roth is after-tax contributions. Only the traditional has a required minimum distribution, and they're both funded with earned income. Now, when we talk about our employer-sponsored retirement plans, we should understand that there's a difference between a defined benefit and a defined contribution. Guys, all you need to do is say those, things slowly. Defined benefit. We know how much the benefit will be. It's defined. So this would be like our traditional pension plans. Typically, it'll be something like 80% of your income will be provided to you in your retirement years. This means that we don't know how much had to be put into the pension in order to know how much we will get as a benefit. This would be greater for an older employee. A defined contribution, we know how much we put in. That would be like a 401k or a 403b. Any type of profit sharing or money purchase plans, like a simple plan, these are all defined contributions. This means that we know how much we're putting in, but we have no idea what benefit we'll have at retirement. This would be more suitable for a younger employee. Let's go ahead and take a look at some different types of features that can be attached to these different types of accounts, if permitted. Most of the accounts we just discussed, we'd call a cash account. Our trades will be paid for in full by the settlement date. Then we have our margin accounts. A margin account says that we would be required to deposit up to 50% of the trade by the settlement date. The remaining amount can be borrowed. Now, there are 3 forms that are required in a margin account. There are 3 forms, 2 are required. The credit agreement is required to be signed. The hypothecation agreement is required to be signed. The consent to loan form is optional. Webster says that to hypothecate means to pledge. So typically, you'll see that word pledge, they're talking about the hypothecation agreement in a margin account, one of the required forms. Let's take a look at what could be margined and what is not permitted to be margined as far as securities go. I usually say, just memorize what isn't marginable and you'll know everything else is. We know that options are not allowed to be margined. Preemptive rights, or just simply rights we call them, would not be permitted to be margined. Any over-the-counter issues that have not been approved by the Federal Reserve Board. Insurance contracts. Custodial accounts, we just talked about that. Mutual funds cannot be margined. And IPOs, or new issues, could not be margined. Anything else would be permitted to be margined. Any of our exchange-listed securities, NASDAQ stocks, our over-the-counter issues if they've been approved by the FRB, and warrants. Now, remember I said that we have to deposit 50% in order to be able to borrow up to 50%? Well, that is the Reg T rule. But the Reg T rule is going to be overridden by FINRA's rule. And FINRA has a rule that says that in order to margin, there is a minimum amount of $2,000 that must be deposited. So here, if we take a look at a customer that's purchasing 100 shares at $50 a share, 100 times 50 is 5,000. Reg T says half of that, 2,500. And since it fulfills FINRA's minimum, then the customer could deposit $2,500 and margin the other $2,500. Then we have buy 100 shares at 30 a share. That's 3,000. Reg T says $1,500 must be deposited, but it does not meet the FINRA minimum requirement. Therefore, the customer would have to deposit a minimum of $2,000 for this trade, meaning they could only margin $1,000 of this trade. Here we have buying 100 shares at $15 a share. That is 1,500. The Reg T requirement is $750, which does not meet that FINRA minimum of $2,000. Therefore, in this case, FINRA would require the entire amount to be deposited. Let's take a look at a few more examples. I apologize. That's in my live class. All right. So what is a maintenance requirement? A maintenance requirement is if a customer's equity in their margin account drops below 25%, then the house, the broker dealer, will do what they call a maintenance call. They'll say, you have to deposit cash or a marginable security and bring that equity back up to at least that 25%. If it's a short account, the minimum is 30%. Now, what is a short sale? It's a pretty easy concept. I think it's easier to explain when I'm in front of you, but just listen closely. Let's say that I borrow securities from a broker dealer and sell them at $40 a share. I'm expecting a drop in the market if I take on a short sale. So I borrowed the securities and sold them at $40 a share. The market drops to 30, at which time I buy them back. When I buy back those securities at $30 a share, I've made $10 on each share. I then hand the securities back to the broker dealer. Anytime you borrow something, there's a fee to borrow. So naturally, the broker dealer will make money off that. But I always say, if I come to your house and say, may I borrow a bag of sugar? And you give me the bag of sugar, you really don't care what I do with that bag, as long as I replace it with a bag of sugar. So if I borrow the securities and I return them, it's really not of the broker dealer's concern what I did with them, as long as they get returned. Now, the fear in a short sale is that I borrow them and sell them at 40, as my example went, and the market goes up instead of down. Let's say it goes to $50 a share. Now I lose $10 on every share. I've got to buy them back at the higher amount because I still have to return them. Now, a broker dealer is allowed to set higher requirements than what these maintenance requirements are. They can say that it can't drop below 40% if they wanted to, but they can't say less than these numbers. If a broker dealer sets a higher requirement for a maintenance call or for a whether it's for a margin account or a short account, then we call this a house call. Oh, there are other ones. I knew there were other ones in here. I was like, where the heck are they? All right. Remember the FINRA rule, the minimum is 2,000. Reg T says 1,500. Here we have a customer that buys 200 shares of ABC Corporation at $9 a share. 2 times 9, that's 1,800 bucks. The FINRA rule is 2,000. The Reg T rule would be 900. Since it doesn't meet the minimum of the FINRA rule, the entire amount of the purchase would have to be deposited. Then we have a customer buying 100 shares at 30 a share. That's $3,000. Reg T says we must deposit up to 1,500, but that does not meet the FINRA requirement of 2,000. Therefore, we must at least deposit the FINRA requirement of $2,000. Customer buying 200 shares at 50 a share. That's $10,000. Reg T says we must deposit up to 50%, which is 5,000. This does meet the FINRA minimum. Therefore, the customer would deposit 5,000, allowing them to margin the other 5. Now, nearly every account is going to be commission-based. This is where every time there's a trade, a commission is charged. And this is good for more of a buy and hold type of investor. I purchase something, I'm going to keep it until I build a home or until I retire or until my child needs to go to college. This would be great for a commission-based account. However, we also have fee-based accounts. These are going to be based on the assets that are in the account. It's either going to be charged monthly or quarterly, and that fee will cover everything that happens in that account. So regardless if there's movement, let's say 50 or 80 times within that month, there wouldn't be a commission charged every time there was movement. Rather, that asset-based fee would cover all of the costs. This is good for a frequent trader. This would not be suitable for the buy and hold strategy. Then we have to look at some other things about an account. Number one, we have to say, is it a solicited or an unsolicited account? A solicited account, very simply put, is I have contacted you and made a recommendation for you to buy or sell a security. An unsolicited account is one where you have contacted me, instructing me to buy or sell a security. A discretionary account has to do with the action, the asset, and the amount. It's important to note that discretionary accounts do not matter when it comes to time and price. You see, in every type of transaction, we've got an action, the buy or sell, the asset, whose stock or what bonds, the amount, how many shares or how many bonds, the time when it occurs, and the price, how much you pay. Time and price are called trading authority, so they don't count as discretion. But if you're going to ask me to make a decision on behalf of the action, asset, or the amount in the transaction, then I would have to hold what we call a discretionary authority over your account. This is a type of LPOA, limited power of attorney. Let's say that you call me and you say, Emma, will you buy me 100 shares of XYZ's common stock? You've named all three A's there. Therefore, I would not need that limited power of attorney, that discretionary authority over your account in order to complete this trade. However, let's say that you call me and you say, hey, Emma, could you buy me 100 shares of a really good tech stock? You haven't given me the amount, have you? Therefore, I would have to have discretionary authority over the account. How do I get discretionary authority over a customer's account? Well, prior to the opening of the account, the customer would have to give me that LPOA, the limited power of attorney, and they give that to me on a dated, written, signed form that would then be approved by my principal. Now, understand this must occur before we can even begin to trade. If you'd like to take that authority away from me, you must again write a letter, sign it and date it, saying that you no longer wish for me to have that authority. But while I have that authority, while that limited power of attorney is in place, that discretionary authority, I can make any trading decisions in your account. I don't need anyone's permission to do so because I've already been granted that permission. I don't need to ask my principal if I can make trades. However, there is increased supervision in this type of account because naturally, every time I make a movement in your account, I do earn a commission. Therefore, it's just more watched. It's supervised more carefully to make sure that I'm always acting in the customer's best interest. A wrap account is any time that we're referencing a type of account where there is a fee-based charge. That fee wraps around the entire account. This is not a sales charge. This is not a commission. This is a fee that would be permitted to be charged. We did talk about it, I believe, a little bit in Unit 4 in mutual funds. I said that in A share and a no load share cannot be charged more than 0.25, and a B share and a C share cannot be charged more than 0.75. All right, so let's take a look. Do I need discretionary authority for a trade? The customer calls, they say the market's falling, we're all going to die, sell everything. Well, they've given me the action, the amount, and the asset. They said sell everything. Therefore, I would not need discretionary authority over the customer's account. This correction is nerve-wracking. Please liquidate the weaker positions in my account by 50%. Now, you're asking me to choose what those weaker positions are. Therefore, that would require discretionary authority. Buy 100 shares of the best retailer available. This, you're asking me to make a decision on the asset. Therefore, it does require discretionary authority. Sell all shares in my account that are priced below $10 a share. You're defining exactly what you want me to sell. Therefore, no discretionary authority would be necessary. Sell half the shares of Buy Stuff Inc. from my account. You've defined what you'd like me to do. Therefore, I do not need discretionary authority. I need $100,000 for a new fishing boat. Sell securities from my account to raise the cash. Say about half from stocks and half from bonds. In this case, you're asking me to make decisions that would require discretionary authority. All right, guys, that's Unit 6. Pretty simple, wouldn't you agree? So I don't think I'm asking a whole lot of you to do the 2 units in this, okay? Kind of simple stuff. Then we move into Unit 7. Again, a very, very simple unit, talking about investment risks. Here, when we look at our investment risks, I want you to identify systematic risks as what I always refer to as MIRI, M-I-R-I. I always say Miri is an acquaintance of mine. No matter what I do, I can't get away from her. I cannot do anything. She's right there anytime I try to do something. That's systematic risks, guys. Systematic risk is any time that we can't avoid a risk. Market risk is the up and down, of course, is going to happen. It has to. Inflation, also known as purchasing power risk, we don't get to make a decision on when inflation goes up or down. So we can't diversify away from it. Reinvestment risk, the fact that a company may liquidate while we're holding its shares, or the fact that we may have a product that fails, we would have to get out there and try to reinvest. And then, of course, interest rate risk. Interest rate risk has to do with the fact that we know there's an inverse relationship. When interest is up, prices go down. When interest is down, prices go up. Therefore, we cannot avoid it. So systematic risks are unavoidable risks, MIRI. Now, if you remember that, it'll help you. As you can see here with non-systematic risks, we don't see an M, an I, or an R, do we? Therefore, on the test, anytime we're looking for systematic risks, just look for MIRI. M, I, or R, we know that that's going to be our systematics. The non-systematic risks, in all honesty, I don't feel a need to take the time here on this section. I think that it really is just you reading it in your book, making some flashcards. Okay, but know that each of these risks are going to apply to specific products. Like business and capital risk have to do with stock. Timing and prepayment have to do with CMOs and any other type of asset, mortgage asset-based type of accounts. Currency risk has to do with anytime we're investing internationally. Credit default financial risk have to do with our debt securities. Liquidity, we talked a good bit just in the not last unit, unit 5, about how hedge funds aren't liquid, about how DPPs aren't liquid, private REITs aren't liquid, right? So what has liquidity, what does not? Legislative, political, and social risk. Anytime there's laws changed or, where politics are involved, it could certainly affect certain sectors. Call risk has to do with our callable bonds and our callable preferred that we discussed in units 2 and 3. And sovereign risk has to do with global investing as well. Sovereign is referencing the fact that that we loan a lot of money to other countries, right? That money is supposed to be paid back to us with interest. So certainly when we're looking at anything having to do with our government money going out the door to other countries, this certainly could affect our investments. So here we take a look at an example. ABC Corporation stock experiences a sharp drop in value in line with a serious market correction. Well, that's a systematic risk. We cannot avoid it. That's market risk. Seabird Airlines stock drops due to the passage of a bill that will impact the firm. This is a legislative risk. This is non-systematic. We can avoid this if we hadn't bought a specific company's stock. The FRB increases the discount rate and your portfolio declines. Well, the discount rate is the only interest rate that is defined by the Fed. We will cover that in following units. This is a systematic risk that we cannot avoid. Buy Stuff stock is negatively impacted by a poorly planned and offensive advertising campaign. This is a type of business risk. This is non-systematic. This can be avoided. Anytime we are making recommendations to a customer, we have to make sure that we believe they are suitable based on information that we obtain from the customer. We call this Know Your Customer, the KYC rule. You need to check the foundation of the customer's financial information. We need to make sure that their insurance needs are being met in case there's a premature death of the breadwinner. We need to make sure that there is some type of safety net for sufficient cash reserves to be available. And then we're going to ask lots of questions having to do with both financial and non-financial considerations. Our financial considerations would have to do with things like, what do they own versus what do they owe? Asking information about what they make versus what they spend. Non-financial considerations would be things like, how old are they? Are they married? Do they work? Do they have children? What are their ages? What type of risks are they willing to tolerate? Are we needing to save money for college? All of these tidbits of information are necessary in order to make good, suitable recommendations to our customers. Now, to finish up this unit, I do want to cover what the objectives are, as well as something called Reg BI. Investment objectives, pretty simple stuff. If we want to preserve our capital, we want to make sure we have safety. If we want a current income, this is going to point towards bonds. Capital growth, this would have to do with stocks. Liquidity, anything that's not going to be illiquid, anything that's not tied up. Mutual funds, exchange traded stocks, money markets naturally are extremely liquid. Things like that. Speculation, margin sales, short sales, uncovered options are all very speculative, as well as junk bonds that we talked about way back in Unit 3. Anytime a customer is looking for tax advantages, the best tax advantage that we have as far as a product is the one that is exempt from federal taxation. That would be our municipal bond. Other tax advantages they may be looking for is things like tax deferred growth, like we have in our IRAs and in our variable products. Withdrawing money in retirement with no taxation, like a Roth IRA. Those are all different tax advantages that we may encounter on our exam. Now, Reg BI, guys, this is important to understand. Reg BI is a requirement. It's a regulation education that's required of you once you pass your Series 6 exam. Regulation it depends. I live in Florida. If you're in a state that does not require a 63, this has to be done after the Series 6. If you're in a state that requires the 6 and 63, it would be done after the 63 is completed. It's an online education that you do through POL. Reg BI has to do with your relationship with your customer. I always say, just remember DCCC, disclosure, care, conflict, compliance, DCCC. The disclosure obligation says that we have to look at the scope and terms of our relationship with the customer. We have to identify fees and costs, the type of account that they're opening, and the scope of the services that we'll be providing. And we must disclose material facts that relate to any conflicts of interest. The care obligation says the risk versus rewards and any costs that may have to the customer. The greater the potential risk, the greater the potential reward. The lower the potential risk, the lower the potential reward. We must have reasonable basis to believe that anything that we recommend to a customer would be suitable for them. And if we're making any recommended transactions, we must make sure it's in the customer's best interest. We would never want to do so in what we call churning, where we're doing so just to generate commissions for ourselves. The conflict obligation is that anytime that we have any type of conflict, note that it's not wrong to have a conflict, it's wrong not to disclose it. Okay, so any conflicts of interest we have to disclose to our customer. We also have to eliminate any special compensation for specific securities. You'll never see Primerica say, hey, we're going to do a trip for AIG's variable annuity, whoever sells the most, because unfortunately, some people may choose to only sell that product because they want that trip. So they'll do a securities trip or a production trip of some type, but it won't be specific to any one specific security. And then, of course, the compliance obligation. This is on a firm level. In other words, Primerica, PFS Investments, it's their obligation. Now, there are specific roles that you'll learn later on in other exams that are not going to be tested on the SIE. The main thing you need to know for the SIE is that the principal is required to be in charge to make sure that all compliance is followed, and that we're to know that compliance exists. I think that our annual compliance meeting, our ACM, does a wonderful job in giving us a lot of that information and preparing us to be able to best care for our clients. All right, guys, last thing here in this unit. Benchmarks and indices. Guys, these are like crystal balls for us. It's indicators that show us what's going on in the equity market, the bond market, the foreign stocks market, right? So the Dow Jones Industrial Average, for example, is going to give us an idea of what's going on in the top 30 companies. The Standard & Poor's is going to tell us what's going on in the top 500 companies. The Russell 2000, the Wilshire 5000, how many companies do you think are in that? Remember, the greater the number, the easier it is to predict the results. Remember the law of large numbers? It works the same here. The Barclays Bond Index, the MSCI, the EFI Index is for foreign stocks. All of these give us ideas of where the market is most likely going to be moving. Benchmarks or indicators, indices. All right, guys, that does finish us up for units 6 and 7. Like I said, pretty easy units compared to the last 5 units we were through, where there was a lot of concepts and a lot of extra things to learn. So I look forward to seeing you. We're going to do units 8 and 9 next. So next assignment will be units 8 and 9 combined.